Hello and welcome. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the often messy, occasionally hilarious, and always consequential world of international diplomacy. Diplomacy? It's like that friend who can somehow diffuse an argument between a drunk guy yelling at a parking meter and the meter reader who just wants to do their job. It's a delicate dance of negotiation, tact, and knowing when to send a strongly worded letter versus, an invasion force. But sometimes even the most seasoned diplomats trip over their shoelaces and faceplant right onto the geopolitical stage. So tonight, we're counting down the top 10 diplomatic disasters of the last 80 years. Those moments when world leaders forgot to pack their chill and accidentally set fire to the rulebook. Stick around to find out which one takes the cake for the most spectacular diplomatic faceplant. Our first contender hails from the usually polite and apologetic land of Canada. In 2018, Canada tried to pull a concerned friend move on Saudi Arabia, urging the release of detained human rights activists. Now, on the surface, that seems like a pretty decent thing to do, right? Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. However, they decided to do it on Twitter. Yes, Twitter, that bastion of nuanced conversation and measured debate. Saudi Arabia, as you might imagine, did not take it well. They kicked out the Canadian ambassador, froze trade, and basically told Canada to take their maple syrup and shove it. The whole thing cost Canada billions in trade and threw a wrench in a massive arms deal. It was a stark reminder that even in the age of instant communication, diplomacy requires a little more finesse than a hastily composed tweet. Next up, we have a tale of betrayal, broken promises, and enough passive-aggressive press conferences to fill the Seine. It's the story of AUKUS, the defence pact that made waves and left France feeling like they'd been thrown overboard without a life jacket. Picture this. Australia, the US, and the UK are huddled in a corner, whispering about a secret submarine deal. France, Australia's longtime defence partner, is completely left out of the loop, like that friend you accidentally forget to invite to the group chat. The result? A diplomatic meltdown of epic proportions. When the AUKUS deal was announced, France was blindsided and furious. They recalled their ambassadors, accused their allies of stabbing them in the back, and basically said, "Oh, so that's how you want to play it? Fine, we're taking our baguette and going home." Billions of dollars were lost, trust was shattered, and the whole debacle left everyone wondering if maybe, just maybe, a quick phone call beforehand might have been a good idea. Just a heads up, guys. Our next diplomatic debacle takes us to the skies above Syria, where a 17-second airspace violation spiraled into an international incident. In 2015, Turkish jets shot down a Russian warplane operating near the Syrian border, claiming it had strayed into their airspace. Russia, unsurprisingly, saw things a little differently. Sanctions rained down on Turkey like a hailstorm, trade relations froze over, and the whole thing left NATO sweating nervously in the corner. It took a formal apology from Turkish President Erdogan to finally thaw the ice. But the incident served as a stark reminder of just how quickly things can go sideways when you mix fighter jets, geopolitical tensions, and a dash of miscommunication. Chapter 4. The Falklands War, a diplomatic disaster in paradise. Let's rewind to 1982, when Argentina, in a move that can only be described as bold, decided to invade the Falkland Islands, a British overseas territory. It was a classic case of a country severely misjudging the situation and overestimating their own hand. Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady herself, was having absolutely none of it. She responded with the diplomatic equivalent of dropping a teacup into a full bathtub. A British task force was dispatched with a clear message. These islands? Yeah, they're ours. Back off. The resulting war lasted 74 days, cost hundreds of lives, and left Argentina licking its wounds. It was a stark reminder that even in the waning days of the British Empire, you don't mess with their islands, or their tea, for that matter. Chapter 5. Venezuela, How to Lose Friends and Alienate Everyone. Our next tale is a cautionary reminder that sometimes you can be your own worst enemy on the world stage. Under President Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela has become a masterclass in how to alienate the international community. We're talking economic mismanagement on a scale that would make even the most hardened economist weep, human rights abuses that would make a dictator blush, and a level of political instability that makes a Jenga tower look like a fortress. The result? Venezuela has become the diplomatic equivalent of that one friend nobody wants to invite to parties anymore. Chapter 6. Brexit, the divorce that just keeps on giving. Brexit, the gift that keeps on giving. In 2016, the UK decided to have a little conscious uncoupling with the European Union, and it's been messier than a breakup conducted entirely through subtweets and passive-aggressive Instagram stories ever since. The Brits voted to leave, and the world watched in a mixture of amusement and horror as they tried to untangle themselves from decades of treaties, trade agreements, and the frankly baffling bureaucracy that is the EU. The result? Years of political gridlock, economic uncertainty, and a whole lot of awkward silences across the English Channel. The pound took a nosedive, trade deals went up in smoke, and the Irish border became a bigger headache than a night out with Nigel Farage. Chapter 7. The Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days that almost ended the world. In 1962, the world held its breath as the United States and the Soviet Union stared each other down over a pile of nuclear missiles in Cuba. The Soviets, led by Nikita Khrushchev, thought it would be a good idea to sneak some nuclear missiles onto Cuba, just a stone's throw from the US mainland. The Americans, led by John F. Kennedy, were less than thrilled about this development. For 13 tense days, the world watched as these two superpowers edged closer to the brink, fueled by paranoia, Cold War anxieties, and enough nuclear firepower to turn the planet into a radioactive wasteland. Thankfully, cooler heads eventually prevailed. A hotline was installed, back-channel negotiations took place, and eventually the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a US promise not to invade Cuba. It was a close call, a stark reminder that sometimes even the most carefully crafted diplomatic strategies can go very, very. Canada tried